I'll briefly describe how this session, the Minds Exchange session, will run. This is a virtual poster style session where we will have invited individuals from all around the world to share with us an initiative, experience, or idea. Presenters will first give 3-minute presentations that will each be followed by a 3-minute question period. Once all presenters are done, we will open the floor to a general question and discussion period. And as you may see on the screen right now, we have 2 breakout rooms today, one for community and one for research and programming.
So hello everyone, my name is Sasha and I will be the moderator in this breakout room for the posters in research and programming category today. We will have 3 presenters in this breakout room. I will go ahead and introduce our first speaker. I'm not going to be reading out each title, so you guys don't have to repeat yourself. And I'm super excited for this session. Thank you all for joining. You will have 3 minutes, as Maggie said. I'm going to give you a 1-minute message in the chat, so you will know how your timing is. And thank you so much. Dilar, please take away.
Thank you so much for the introduction. I'm a PhD candidate at Guidance and Psychological Counseling Department in Turkey. And I'm also somatic experiencing practitioner. It's a relatively new approach to trauma and stress reactions. So in this research, since I have so little time, I have tried to mention the basics of this research. So I have created a program, actually 8-week program for PhD students to actually teach them about the somatic experiencing and provide them some hands-on experiences with this SE-based tools. So it was an online group and it was a psychoeducational group because it includes educational part about the somatic experiencing and also experiential part. I have created a poster and only approximately 15 PhD students wanted to join, but only 7 of them was able to join the group work. So with me, we were 8 group members and with 1 group leader. So we have actually meet once in a week for 2 hours with those people, with the same people. It was a closed group. And at the first weeks actually, first 2 or 3 weeks, we have covered what is somatic experiencing, what are the stress reactions for them, how they can handle, how they are handling with the stress reactions, and how these reactions actually have an impact on their academic work. We have discussed those things in the group, and later than that, we have conducted some work with the SE tools like grounding, resources, etc. And at the end of this 8-week, actually all PhD students stated that it was very helpful for them to be in the group at first because they think that they were alone for the whole process, and they realized that they were not alone and there are other people who are like them struggling. And we were starting the sessions by asking, how are you? But it was forbidden to say just good. We were explaining ourselves. So they said that this was very useful for them because for the first time they were able to think, how am I? really, or what is going on with me, etc. And they were hearing from others as well. So these were the main points I guess I can mention about this program. So it was so short, but I think time is up. Yeah. So yeah, it can be adaptable as well. Since it was online, there were participants from Europe, from Turkey as well. So I think online group was much more useful in that case, because everyone is everywhere in our time. So yeah, that was all for me, I guess.
Thanks so much, Dilara. I think we can have a little bit of more discussion with questions, so you maybe might expand on some of the points.
Yeah.
If anyone has a question, wanna say it, or I will call on you if you raise your hand, or you feel free to write it in the chat. I think I might ask a question if there is no one, to give people time. This sounds really like a very interesting approach. Like, how did you come up with it? Whereas there's previous studies of similar.
Yeah. When I have started this training, somatic experiencing training, it was during the COVID time. And during the COVID, I wanted to help people because it was so like, as we have all experienced something different, so stressful. So we created a group work with the university students during that time, and it was so helpful for them. I could see that we conducted 2 groups at the same time. It was so useful. And when I started with the Remo project, Brian and Dara also project members, so researcher mental health project. So when I started to think about those projects as well, I thought that why can't I use somatic experiencing with PhD students as well? Because I am a PhD candidate, I have so many stressful times as well, and I am using SC for myself. So I just thought that it might be useful to teach people about it, to help them actually to use for their stressful moments, and to help SC as well to spread around the world. So yeah, that's how I came up with the idea. Sorry, I was reading the message, so it was not about me.
No worries. Great, thank you so much. I think this is it for the short part of the question period, but we'll get back to you soon. Thank you so much, Dilara. So the second presenter can get ready. And Dara, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to switch the slide. Yeah. Thank you so much. Please go ahead.
Thank you. And thanks everyone for joining us. So as Lara said, I'm part of the Remo network, as is my colleague Brian. I'm based in Dublin City University. This, I suppose, is a reflection on one particular topic that has caught my attention within the Remo story, and in networking, as well as doing research in the area from a psychology perspective. And this imposter syndrome that we all know and love and hate so well, defined as the internal experience of intellectual phoniness, seems to be particularly prevalent in academia, and with particular experiences for early career researchers, particularly as we navigate different titles within long-standing academic hierarchies. I recently conducted some organizational psychology research into this area with a set of qualitative interviews with early career academics, and kind of 3 key themes were present in many people's experiences. The first of which is that often this experience goes, it lives quite silently within academic cultures, and many people have this permanent sense, regardless of where they are in their journey, a permanent perception of non-belonging, not feeling good enough, not feeling like they deserve to be there, and constantly fighting the next thing. From a cognitive perspective, that there's this kind of what I've called the double-edged sword of falsifiable evidence. No matter what our peers say, no matter what achievements we have, whether they're grants, papers, whatever we define as success, that does not often fix the problem that is that experience of being an imposter. And there's often this final theme of not knowing where to blame or who to blame. Is it the system? Is it ourselves? Is it neither? Or is it a little bit of both? And the question that we always ask in psychology is, to what extent can or should we intervene? And rather than obsess over that, I've learned a lot throughout the Remo experience and with colleagues and peers, in that simply facilitating spaces, particularly workshops, where we can name these things and often use more ethical methods, where we can simply have personas to discuss the phenomenon that might be this thing we call imposter syndrome, to then allow other people to often disclose that they have this long-standing experience. And that in itself, though unintentionally, is therapeutic. So I'm especially passionate about facilitating those spaces, and perhaps advancing a more formal research agenda on what precisely those mechanisms are that seem to allow people not fix the imposter, but simply feel a bit more at ease with understanding the phenomenon. So thank you for listening. I hope that was 3 minutes.
Yeah, well, perfect timing. Thank you so much. So I will probably again ask a question if there's no one else raising their hand. Oh, okay. There is a question. To what extent is it that institutions and peers don't do enough to make people feel like they belong? Does the focus on imposter syndrome make individuals responsible for a more systemic lack of inclusion? That's a question from Brian.
That's a hard question, Brian. It's a classic mix of top-down factors as well as bottom-up factors, and that's a really hard one to parse out with the imposter phenomenon. It is a particular psychological syndrome, almost, such that regardless of even the perfect system or the imperfect system that is modern day academia, no matter what is done, if someone is at what you might call a clinical level of imposter syndrome, they will be able to write it off and find a way of still reinforcing their own imposter. That would be a high level version of it. But the more mild to moderate experiences of imposter syndrome that many people know and often joke about, and that's one of the reasons why it's so popular, I think that's absolutely where institutions and peers and labs can play a role. The classic example I give is onboarding. So the first time somebody joins a lab, what is the procedure for making them feel warm and welcome, and what is that culture of communication or around these sorts of issues? That's often a really powerful first step, because if we get it wrong, that has a cascading effect. So diplomatic answer is a bit of both.
Thank you for your answer. And we have Lucia with another question.
I hope I can phrase this well. So it seems like often when someone has symptoms of imposter syndrome, that the way people try to help is to show them their objective successes.
Yeah.
And my absolutely non-expert opinion is that we should instead say, like, well, it's okay to not always be successful too, right? Like the idea that like you're okay because actually you're really good, rather than you're okay because you're okay. So I'm curious what the unveiling looks like.
So and it also speaks to Paul Baxter's question there. Thanks, Paul. Which is this kind of thing of labels and comparisons, and that's why I called it a double-edged sword there as a theme, because in many ways falsifiable evidence could be enough to keep quiet that imposter. One of the examples from that study, which is currently being prepped for publication, was a participant that was in a Viva scenario and had a very combative experience, and then once they were awarded the PhD, they burst into tears because it wasn't success that was objectively defined by an external panel and awarded by way of a PhD. Rather, the tiers were referring to their feeling that they're just giving it to me because I worked hard, and there was a personal factor there as well. They're just giving it. So the high-level imposter syndrome is so powerful because no matter what other people say or do, they'll find a way of outthinking that. So when I talk about unmasking, it's having conversations like this. So it might seem odd to say, but the fact that it might not go away, or the fact that other people experience it, that can be kind of reassuring. That a professor whom you admire might actually also experience it. That can also be somewhat reassuring. So time to wrap up. So thank you for listening. If anyone's interested, I can send on a draft of the paper.
Awesome. Thanks so much for your talk. And with that, we have our last speaker, Brian.
So thanks very much, Sasha, for the introduction. My name is Brian Cahill. I am the grant manager of the REMO Cost Action on Research on Mental Health, and that REMO is almost finished. We're in our last year 4. We basically started about 2018 with a number of people who could see that there was a problem within academia. And we did our best to raise awareness. We had a session at the Euroscience Open Forum, but as a kind of consequence of that, we set up a proposal for cost funding. And cost is like a big networking project, or mainly focus on some sort of research issue mostly. The title is Bridging Research, Practice and Advocacy. We basically started as advocates rather than as researchers in this field, and that we brought in the people who are involved in practice and research into the cost action once we had it running, or as part of the proposal. Our first action was to set up a researcher mental health and wellbeing manifesto, which was written co-creatively throughout the whole network. We have run over the last 3 years an ambassador training school. Our 3rd edition ended yesterday, and this is a training in how to advocate within your university, within your country, for well-being and mental health within your institutions. Our REMO conference will take place in 3 weeks in Budapest, and it has also run for the last 3 years. Over 1,000 people have attended our webinars. We are running the Staircase Survey on Sustainable Working Conditions in Academia. Please fill it out. I can't include a barcode here, but if you can find it on the internet, please share it with whoever you can. We have 3 working groups working at the individual, institutional, and policy levels, so that this is kind of a little bit like my question for Dara about imposter syndrome, whether it's an individual or a kind of like an institutional level. Our manifesto was cited in a recent EU policy report on the uptake of AI in science, and you can see that kind of there's a whole kind of section about kind of mental health within academic careers, and kind of how AI-based training could affect that, which is the main topic of our action chair, Gabor Kishmihak. We have communication in YouTube, social media, podcasts, Zenodo, etc. That the new European Charter for Researchers includes mental health, which we will take as kind of something that we influence, because we had a policy officer 2 years ago at our conference who said it wouldn't happen. A couple of weeks later, the European Commission President in her State of the Union address said that mental health was a big issue, and it appeared in the Charter for Researchers, the next draft of the Charter for Researchers. And we have a national policy brief collection, briefs that are being kind of put together by our Maya Sundukova, who's in the other breakout room, and if you want to talk to her, and 3 article collections. So I would be very happy to answer your questions. And thanks to the organizers.
Amazing. Thank you to all our speakers, and thanks, Brian. We can take questions for Brian. And thanks, Heidi, for reminders. I think this is a great network that you've put together in such a short period of time, Brian. And I'm curious, how do you see maybe if this kind of network would expand, or like, do you see yourself collaborating with other networks, maybe covering maybe North America or any other countries?
I show a map of Europe here because these are the official cost countries. You can see that on the outskirts that we also have Morocco and Tunisia, Israel, and near neighbor countries. I think we have had people from India, from North America, from Colombia, from South Africa involved in the network. I think that there's only, in some ways, the switch to online during the pandemic made it a lot easier to include different countries, because I think most of our activities switched to online, and kind of most of the budget goes for travel, which is only open to the European partners. So this is a restriction from the funding, but it wasn't a restriction from us. And kind of to go forward, we probably will apply for another cost action, maybe on research culture, which is a little bit more general. But this will be submitted in October. And if anybody wants to collaborate on that, I think they're very, very welcome to do so. And we're still open to join, even though we're kind of going to kind of wrap up in September, that the network will continue on afterwards.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I guess I will have another small question. So you're focusing mostly on the researcher mental health, but how do you see the maybe basic effects of academic influences during maybe undergraduate degrees? So like when the university starts, how like that transition builds up into the problems we have with further like postgraduate studies?
I think that this is something that is definitely the case. I don't know. I mean, none of my parents both didn't go to university, and kind of as a kind of first generation academic, I really found kind of undergraduate much more difficult than I personally. This was quite the biggest shock for me, I think, was probably at bachelor level, and then even masters, it got a little bit better, and with kind of the further I got, the more secure I felt. But I think definitely at undergraduate level, personally, I struggled a lot more than I did at later levels. But I think with kind of increasing international mobility, I think it's certainly something that we see, that kind of that the more kind of that somebody doesn't belong in the system, and particularly if they come, at least in Europe, from non-EU countries, that this is definitely within the European system is something that isn't talked about, but that's definitely the more marginalized you are, the more marginalized you will feel within the system. And this is what we see time and time again.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so with that, we are concluding our initial presentations and question period, and we are open to general discussion with the audience, and feel free to you feel free to answer or ask the questions. I think people are kind of in generally, from what I could see in the chat, curious on how to connect with Remo, and I think if you want to share with us your links or just paste them in the chat, that would be great.
I will do so. I think I will put I think that Dara already put the website of Remo, if
Yeah.
I didn't fully follow it, but that's already there. I think that there's also to join our working groups, which in some ways there's not going to be a lot of ways to contribute to the working groups, but in other ways it means that you end up on our central mailing list, which is through the working groups. I think this is something that is through the eCost. I think that there's a link on the website to that, and that it's something that is definitely the main way that we have it. Also, following us on LinkedIn or connecting with us on LinkedIn is probably the best way to follow what we are doing, because we have a newsletter and we have all of our events always go onto LinkedIn first. So I think this is probably, in some ways, is the best communication channel that we have. And it's also that LinkedIn is very focused on careers and and academic careers in our case. So I think this is something that is quite useful.
Great, thank you so much. So yeah, if anyone has questions, you can feel free to put them in the chat, or you can also just simply raise your hands and I'm gonna call on you. And with that, I have a question to Dilara. If you could tell us a little bit more about the process of the research, and maybe like you could share with us some memorable moments, like aha moment when one of your participants felt like, okay, this is exactly where I see the difference from the stressed and tense maybe feelings and going into more relaxed and calm space.
So about the research part, I have conducted a semi-structured interviews before the group project. When the people applied for the group, I have conducted interviews to learn their aim at first, and then if they are appropriate for the group too, because sometimes they are expecting much more from the group. So that's why I have conducted interviews, and then we have started the group work. As I said, actually, like every session has some aha moments in itself. I can say that because in each week, like the first week, they were so surprised because like there were other PhD students, and somehow they are struggling as well. So we are many. They were like, oh, okay, there are some people as well. So at the other weeks, they start to develop some body sensations and they started to understand them. So somatic experiencing is a body-based approach, and it is based on the sensations to not just feel it, actually to understand. So when you are stressed, actually it has a beginning. When you realize that you are stressed, it was like, I don't know, started way before than that. So the aim is to understand from the feelings, body sensations, how you are stressful actually, basically, so you can start to prevent using some resources before going to the end of the stress. So this was the main aim. And each week actually they were mentioning that. So I had a presentation and I used some grounding, and this was so helpful for me. So since everyone was sharing, they could hear from each other as well. And I think this was amazing too, because at the end of the group work, they mentioned that actually they inspired from others' resources as well. So that's how actually they develop their own resources. So for example, someone say that they have flower, which is a resource for them. And the other one may say that, oh, I have flower too, but I never thought that it could be a resource. Like I thought that it was always something physical, like going to walk or do the Pilates, etc. So it was an aha moment for them. People can use flowers, so I can use them too. Or people can use grounding before the presentation, so I can use it too. I can try. So each session, I guess, has its own aha moments, but at the end of the group work, I have conducted again semi-structured interviews with the participants. Actually, it was very helpful for me to understand their perspective, because at that time, I really understand that they are really using SE, and they started to somehow handle with their stress from an SE perspective. Of course, it's a short time period. Maybe like I have conducted interviews after 2 weeks at the end of the group work, so there was not so much time between the group work and the interviews. Maybe that's why they were using it, but somehow it may help them to change their perspective, actually. So I think this was all helpful. I can see from the interviews and from the feedback that I get from the participants.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. It's very insightful. I have another question for Dara. Maybe it's a little bit controversial, but we kind of all have this opinion that imposter syndrome is bad for you, but on the other side, it's a coping mechanism, I think, that our minds are building to protect us maybe from feeling of some kind of stress or some kind of feelings. So is it necessarily a bad thing that we are experiencing imposter syndrome? And what is the way to maybe not necessarily fight it, but like find a way to switch it to something that would feel
that's a
better
good
for
question.
us?
If it's the high level, almost debilitating experience of imposter syndrome, then it's a risk factor. Interestingly, a lot of the literature on it comes from medical trainees and trainee doctors who, if you think about it, they aren't doctors yet, and they are in university settings or in teaching hospitals learning to become doctors. So they are kind of imposters. They are fish out of water, as it were. And they will naturally have those feelings. But if those feelings become debilitating to the point that they can't ask for help, they don't engage in supervision, they withdraw, those then become actual risk factors for example, patient safety. And I suppose similar things can be applied to anyone's experience of imposter syndrome. I suppose one of the premise of your question is that, given that it's so prevalent, how does it function as a strength? And interestingly, in the qualitative research that I referred to, a couple of people did speak to that. Psychologically, people debate, is it really just a form of personality or trait neuroticism? And it probably is, but it's just manifesting in a particular way that is quite unique in terms of feeling that one's a genuine fraud. But it can be used as a strength so long as people are critically aware of it, and we have a culture where we can call these things out. And very often we kind of see that informally, don't we, where we see people joking about the imposter among us, and there is a culture of being able to say, oh my gosh, I feel like such an imposter here. And I think that's healthy to an extent. So I think we can build a culture around it to help people understand what it is, acknowledge that there's nothing inherently wrong with oneself, and we can in a way leverage it as a strength, but we just have to be careful that we don't normalize it either. And there's a brilliant article in the Harvard Business Review a few years ago, which was referring to a culture of talking down to women. Stop telling women they have imposter syndrome was the title of the article, in reference to the many institutional factors such as harassment, pay gaps, and other gendered problems, and that the narrative towards women was, no, you are experiencing imposter syndrome. So as ever, we just have to be mindful of how we balance top down and bottom up factors there. So yeah, hopefully I've answered the controversial question okay.
Thanks so much. Yeah, no, I think this is great to be mindful of the risks. I was just kind of curious, how is it the risk by itself? Is unveiling the masks? Could it also be maybe a very vulnerable moment for people?
Yeah, that's interesting too, isn't it? Because in a hyper-competitive environment that is modern-day academia, there is that feeling of, well, if we show anything that could be interpreted or misinterpreted as weak, then that's not to our advantage. Now, obviously, we're all here and we're interested in mental health, so it's probably not applicable to us, but we do know of cultures where, yeah, there are real CVs on Twitter. Oh, here's all my failings. Here's all the grants I didn't get. Here's all my rejections, and that can be quite powerful for other people to see that it's not always positive. So when I say unveiling, it's what a therapist might say in terms of being able to sit with the discomfort and not obsessing over this kind of fix-it culture, and just being able to be compassionate and supportive of peers in recognizing that cycle, and knowing that you might not be able to say anything to get rid of someone's imposter syndrome, but you might be able to help them detach from it a bit. And much like your question, maybe it could even be used as a strength. One small thing as well that is often recommended is celebrating the small wins, because we're actually very bad at that as well. So we might say, I won't be an imposter anymore until I get my PhD, until I get my postdoc, until I get this grant. And you might very well get that or get close to that, but maybe we need to just celebrate those small wins a little bit more and sit with that moment rather than a week later going on to the next thing and starting that cycle all over again. So I think there's lots of things we can do.
Amazing. Yeah, thank you so much for that perspective. Brian, I'm just curious, how often can people find this type of research focusing on researchers, and if there are any maybe students in their undergraduate degrees who would love to pursue this kind of programs and maybe find supervisors, and like how could we promote this kind of research activities?
I think this is kind of advocating for the European Commission or other research funders to fund this sort of research. I think this is one of the, I think that by just bringing attention to that kind of mental health of researchers is an important thing. And that is, and kind of to break the stigma around that is very, very important. I think that what we see is very often from the researchers we get a response, but very often from the research managers, from people who work in international offices and doctoral programs. Those sort of people have to deal with kind of the mental health of researchers on a daily basis, and they're not qualified for that. So that they see the problems and want to change the system. So it's at that level. And then at the next level, it's that if you have kind of the leadership of universities, that people who work in research funders who very often talk about excellence and impact and all of these important things. But I think that at the human level, that kind of that we're dealing with human beings, and that it's a very precarious career for early career researchers to pursue research, and that's to understand that, and that's kind of that it's not a matter that the people who make academic career are always the best ones. I think that very often that the best are the kind of the ones who see, oh, this system doesn't work for me, and that we can to respect people at all levels who kind of research, and not just to have a kind of a very kind of big focus on the PIs and kind of the people who win Nobel Prizes, which is great. But I think that I think we have to see kind of research from a very holistic viewpoint where we value all of the people involved in this process.
Great, thank you. There is some comments in the chat I'll read. I think grad school reinforces imposter syndrome. Some PIs don't express that they also or too had failures. Instead, they make you feel like a failure when your project doesn't work. I think this imposter syndrome, this syndrome will be around for a long time until mentorship is addressed in academia, if anyone wants to maybe address that.
My PhD supervisor wasn't perfect, but I think that one of the things he said, which is probably not completely healthy, is that kind of in his PhD, if he didn't achieve everything that he was supposed to achieve, and that was the first day of my PhD. So, so it meant that I had a certain freedom not to achieve all the things that were planned for me in some ways. And this is exactly how my PhD worked out, is that my co-supervisor left with the funding for the project. So I had a lot of freedom in ways that many PhD researchers don't have. And this is something where I saw, once I left and I went and I saw in other labs how it worked, that mostly they had a project that they had very little agency to decide their own direction, that it was decided from above, you have this equipment, you do it in this way. And so I think across the disciplines, this is very different. And I think in a lot of the natural sciences, research, material science, it was really decided kind of from before you even start what your project is going to be about. And this is something that, and if it doesn't work, whose fault is it? And if it's a matter of finding the fault rather than trying to save the project and and then kind of to educate a doctoral researcher or researcher who will go on to have a great career afterwards, and the actual research, it's great if it works, but normally you get something to work.
Can I
Go
add
ahead.
something as well? Sorry. I just want to add something about the comments. I'm so sorry about my pronunciation, but Arianna write in the chat about we have other identities. But I think all of these things actually is a little bit linked with making a community with the researchers, because yes, we are doing projects, we are like writing papers, we have working groups in our projects too, but at the end of the day, we are alone with our computer and we have so many things to do and so many things to handle actually. So when we go home, we are always thinking at the background about the paper that we need to write, or email that we need to send or reply, etc. So it became our life. And I think making a community like this group work that I have created is so important for researchers, because that's how they can understand like others have that problem too, because we are like, I don't know about everybody for sure, but in my department, we are not talking about those kind of things. Of course, there are always things to do, but we are just talking about those. Like, I need to do that, I need to do this, but we do not talk how we are handling those things or what we are feeling about those things. So hearing from others help us to understand ourselves as well. So I think the community helps people to understand themselves. So that's how actually they started to realize that, oh, I am using, for example, my hobbies to handle with that, or I am using my friends, or I am feeling sad as well, I am feeling anxious too. But since we have like just writing papers, sending emails, so in this like robotic way, we are not looking ourselves. So we are not realizing that we have some other identities too. So that's why I just wanted to add those things. I don't know if it's relevant, but it was so relevant in my mind. So I just want to add that.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Dilara. Yeah, no, I think this questions we all kind of like having in our minds of how to deal with those maybe stressful situations or like feeling of inadequacy and things like that. And I do believe that, yeah, opening up a little bit would, as Dara was saying, can help others to relate to our experiences as well, and maybe build this feeling of community. So we are, I'm super happy for this session happening today. And I think I have another question, if I don't see more comments in the chat, on probably to reflect also a little bit of Lucia's point that a culture publishing or sharing non-results might also help. I was wondering if there is also ways to promote this kind of research and maybe healthier overall environment by introducing different success metrics on grant applications. And if there is maybe like policy making initiatives on how to reward researchers who do manage to provide a supportive environment. How do we people who actually make
there is a kind of a movement to reform research assessment, starting with the DORA, the Declaration on Research Assessment from well over a decade ago. In Europe, there's the Coalition on Advancing Research Assessment, which is looking into many of the ways that researchers are evaluated and research is evaluated. And that this is something that is a work in progress. And I think this is because that there is a very, very strong bias for very few quantitative metrics in the way that things were done previously or are normally done, which is kind of how many citations for papers, journal impact factor, how much money have you brought in grants, and that this really discriminates against people earlier in their career with a really great idea. Because I think you will have fewer citations, you will have fewer papers, you will have, fewer grants. And I think that this is something where kind of if you have been in the system for a very long time, you have big advantages over a newcomer. And I think if something is kind of actually evaluated based on the quality of the idea, this is the quality of the work done. I think this is something that I think that we would all like to see, that we have more qualitative evaluation of research and researchers rather than just quantitative metrics.
I jump in there as well. Like it's very interesting symmetry, isn't it, that we can talk about really specific psychological stuff and then end up talking about the openness of academia and of science as a whole as a potential antidote. I always found that a very interesting and authentic connection there, because on the one hand, where we see a more radical call from the likes of the Reforming Research Assessment to say abolish all quantitative metrics and do away with citation metrics, and instead have a different, more impact-driven, qualitative and more holistic evaluation. And some universities, I'm thinking of some in the Netherlands versus other ones, will have varying levels of endorsement of that. I suppose the tricky thing for that young scholar, let's say, who's suffering from the likes of imposter syndrome and trying to navigate that space, is to what extent should we wait for that culture to emerge? Should we play the game, as it were, versus push a more open culture? And those push-pull factors are happening as we speak. And open science is a fascinating dynamic, because I see Lucia's point there about sharing non-results. Does evidence work that's been done, and collaboration and many other points which will be increasingly valuable to different sort of grant structures. We often talk about when I give a similar talk about imposter syndrome with an ITN group, they were discussing what could or should be the solution. And in the way that we say, okay, we need to evaluate ourselves differently, that's one aspect. But maybe to think of those top-down factors, toxic senior management or the commercial model of the university. How do we fight that area? And maybe we need to think about taking away people's grants. This is always the thing where you go, you need to evidence how your workplace will not worsen one's mental health. You need to evidence how in the course of this project that you want funding for, you need to evidence how you will address clinical levels of imposter syndrome or prevent them. I think that we need to definitely get towards more of that space as well, where there's a good evidence-based conversation before any of these long-term projects start as to how we can stop what is often sometimes a small set of harmful, toxic people or leaders or cultures that create large amounts of harm for or risk for often younger and less experienced people. So I think all of these movements are happening in tandem. So let's see where we are in 5 years.
Amazing. Yeah, no, I think these are all great points, and hopefully we are at the right direction. I think we are going to conclude at this point. Thank you all so much for joining and sharing your ideas.